Sharp.
This is Steve Downs, the voice of Master Chief, Spartan 117. Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. Anthony and Skylar will take it from here. Master Chief, out.
Welcome to Quality Time, the KO Koala Entertainment Podcast. My name is Anthony Nicolosi.
And I'm Skylar Sokol.
And today we are going to be talking about what I'll for now call next-gen upgrades. And what do I mean by that, Skylar?
I called it next-gen tech, but yeah.
Next-gen tech. Okay, that's kind of cool, you know?
Yeah.
Basically, I mean, now that we're rolling around to a new console generation, this is applicable, but this does not at all fall exclusively in console space. And actually, I do have some questions for you on that front later. But what we're talking about today is what we've been seeing, at least for sure, in the last really every console generation, at least from the Sony and Microsoft side of things, is the Nintendo, Nintendo too, is always the touting of, hey, you can play this game at a higher resolution and more frames per second. The graphics are better. And then these are resolution and frame rate are generally
more bits
more are generally like
Nintendo
two things
64.
heavily marketed. Teraflops was one that we saw recently, like with the 1X. That was something they did. They went ham on. So they leaned into. So we have we had a discussion last week about Halo Infinite, and at the end of that podcast we asked this question, right? Because Halo Infinite had showed the world. We went into detail on the last podcast, if you're interested, on all of the various things 343 could be going through right now as to explain the visual state of that Halo Infinite demo. But regardless, that thing looks how it looks right now. And one of the things they're touting is, it's 4K 60 frames per second on the Series X. And that was just something that I, immediately, came to, like, if you told me that instead of trying to push 4K resolution, instead it would be 1080 and you could significantly increase the visual fidelity, I would so much more prefer to choose that, right? That's kind of the conversation we're having, right? Like, are these the kind of upgrades that really these platforms should be trying to achieve, or are there maybe other more significant upgrades that they could do? Some things that are maybe not so readily or easily available. What do you think?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is, like, the history of this starts with, like, the old consoles, like even at the NES and that days, right? And that was when it was what was called the Bit Wars, and that was where, like, the NES was the 16-bit console, right? And then, like, the Sega Genesis came out, I think, and that was a 32-bit console. And these like bit amounts actually matter, right? That determines, like, how many colors you have. Like, it actually matters in how significant the data, like, how much data you can put in your game, right?
Yeah.
And Nintendo 64, that's literally why there's a 64 in the name of the Nintendo 64, is because it's a 64-bit console, right? Like, this is...
Oh, was that...
That's literally what the 64 means.
Makes sense.
That's how important it was, right? And that has gone away completely now because we have, like, that's not even a concern anymore. But then people started talking about resolution, right? How many pixels you have. And that mattered for a long time, right? Until we got to about 1080p. It is difficult for the human eye to discern between 1080p and 4K, and it's basically completely pointless to go above 4K. There's, like, very little difference between 4K and above to the human eye. Yeah, and then we also talk a lot about, like, frame rate, right? This is another huge conversation that we have, and that, once again, matters a lot. We start at, like, things at, like, 15-30 FPS. It's easy to see something running at 15 FPS versus 30 FPS. But then 30 FPS versus 60 FPS, I know a lot of console gamers especially who don't really see the difference.
Between 30 and 60?
Right. And then going up to, like, 60 and 120, it's even harder to spot the difference. And going over 120, there's no way you're spotting the difference. You might be able to feel it if you've played it a ton, but I don't think you're really going to see it. So that's just my opinion on this, right? I think these conversations about resolution, these conversations about frame rate are stupid. Once you're over 60 FPS, I think that you don't even really need to be talking about frame rate anymore. Maybe up to 120, then you can stop. And then resolution, I think 4K, 4K is unnecessary in my opinion, but anything above that is even going to be more unnecessary, unless you're literally like projecting your game onto a movie theater size screen or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that's a great point to end then on, because the thing I was going to say is being somebody who usually when I play, I am playing on a monitor, but many times I'm playing with Brittany, my wife, and she plays on a 65-inch TV, and that's a thing where I'll be honest, I've noticed the upgrades more significantly, and obviously that makes sense. You pointed out, like, if you had this big screen, this big projector or something, the more pixels helps because it's a bigger screen, and you get better detail, especially like when you get closer to those screens.
Yeah. But when you're talking about like a normal computer monitor, like the difference between 4K and 1080p is almost negligible already.
Well, so when I purchased this monitor, this Asus gaming monitor last year, I was like, okay, do I invest in a 4K monitor, which was about twice at least the price of the 1080p one, but if I could hit 144 hertz like refresh rate and I had 1080p, that's all I give a shit about. Like I don't see things, for example, some things that I think recently have made a bigger impact from a visual fidelity perspective is like HDR. I think HDR makes things look much prettier.
HDR
the color range,
totally.
Yeah. I think there's a big difference there.
Just like the shift from LCD to LED as well.
Yeah.
That made a big difference, right?
Right. So there some things like that. Now, before I totally jump into this other thought, it's you brought up the N64 and all the like they literally marketed the technical advantage in the name, like they went that far as to do that. And that's a thing obviously to like take into account. Every year, every console generation, you have to convince people why they should spend $300 to $500 on this thing, And so like that's why you lean into I think that's why the Xbox One X went so hard on we have the most teraflops, because it's like, what can you tell people? Like,
and this is teraflops referring to the communication between what?
Teraflops refers to the amount, you can, to simplify it generally, how much computations that processor can do per, I think it's like 4 teraflops per second. So it can do 4, that
matters, right? Processor speed
does matter.
Is something that actually matters.
Does matter. Processor speed. And actually, one thing I forgot to mention, one thing that this particular console generation is introducing is the SSD, the storage changes.
And that's what I was going to say. Processor speed only matters up to as much as your RAM and read-write speed can handle, right? Because the second that your process speed goes over like what your RAM or read-write can handle, then who the fuck cares that your processor can do more computations when you don't have the memory to support it?
Or you're throttled by your bus limitations, right? So if you've got, for those non-tech people, you got your RAM and you got your computer. When the game is like the memory, the game is running in RAM, and it needs to send instructions to get processed to the CPU or the GPU. Well, that needs to travel across these buses, and those buses have memory bandwidth limitations themselves. Right. So like, doesn't matter how fast the individual parts are if like the information going between it is only so fast, right? This is a reason why you might see some games, you'll see a AAA studio do amazing things on like pretty low performant hardware, like that with they'll do all these fancy tricks and stuff that sometimes you don't see smaller studios or indie studios being able to pull off the same magnitude or scale, because
don't
like
have the knowledge or the like existing tools to implement this really easily,
or time, right? Like that's just that's the AAA studios enact a huge amount of, I don't know if discipline is the right word, but scrutiny on how data is packed and making sure that it's all optimally passed to all these things. They take all these things into account. And sometimes indie game devs, just the payoff for that is maybe not so significant.
The AAA studios can hire a
have.
single person to do the whole thing too, right? Like this person's
Shit,
job
dude,
is to do the optimization, right? Indie
It's
studios
usually
can't
like
do
a
that.
team, right? Like they usually have multiple people. There are teams optimizing Halo Infinite, I am sure, that are at least 5 times the size of KO Koala.
And doing a way worse job than KO Koala is.
Maybe hard to know. That's a
We'll see.
Low blow unfair. Yeah, we'll see. But anyway, in that's a particular Halo Infinite was an example of something that I wish they would have prioritized. Actually, Halo 5 is another one. Okay, Halo 5 is another one in the story of they also the graphics in some places were like meh, but they prioritize frame rate. So I'll ask you, what's more important? I know your answer, but to tell everybody else, what's more important if you had to choose between frame rate and not just resolution, but it's like what. And actually, Halo Infinite's doing this. You can see it, the pop in on all that shit.
Yep.
Like you could see like grass like literally grow in front of you in the demo. Halo 5 had also very aggressive texture filtering, and that was to make sure they always stayed at a fluid, like perfect 60 frames per second.
The answer is FPS, by the way. The frame rate is more important. I mean, that's why I literally play PC games, right? So that I can turn down the graphics of my game to get the frame rate I want if my hardware can't support like the maximum graphics, right? Like frame rate is so much more important. At Rollick, one of our dedicated viewers, he's playing this this game called Last Epoch. It's an early access Diablo style like action RPG game, top down like hack and slashy sort of game. And it runs at like 15 FPS at times. And it literally makes him not want to play. Like, it's probably one of the best designed ARPGs out there right now. And that, it doesn't matter because, like, it's just unplayable. Like, low FPS games are unplayable. Rocket League literally launched on consoles at 30 FPS. Is it still 30 FPS on consoles? I don't think so.
It's 60,
yeah,
it used to be.
Now. It used to be 30 FPS on consoles and 60 on PC. And, like, I don't know how people played console Rocket League. That's why a ton of people switched from console to PC originally in Rocket League.
That makes a lot of sense. I can't imagine playing Rocket League at 30
Are you
frames
kidding
per second.
me, dude? Like...
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was the reason why so actually Destiny 2 is an example of an interesting decision. They went 30 FPS on consoles. And I bought that game only because it looked beautiful, mainly because it looked beautiful. Watching some streamers play, and I was like, that is just like a really pretty game. Looks like it's fun enough to like spend money on and try. And I thought it was really, but at the same time, the frame rate was a big reason why eventually I just like couldn't keep playing that game. Like, now one thing people don't, here's an argument as to why I think, like what you said about what the human eye can perceive in regards to like literally frames changing is of course absolutely true. Now one other thing though that on that front, like whether it matters for frame rate to increase beyond whatever the visual beyond 60, let's say, the reason there's a few things to frame rate, I guess is what I want to say. One is the actual refresh rate of your monitor and how fast things are displaying for you. That's the refresh rate. Frames per second of a game is not only when a game a game processes things in a sequence of frames or ticks, right? And every frame has a certain amount of time. You have a certain amount of time to execute a particular frame to hit a certain goal of 60 frames a second, 30 frames. For 60 frames per second, it is 16.7 milliseconds. So the game needs to run all of its logic. It's got to process input, for example, process the dynamic falling out of that input, render everything all within 16.7 milliseconds for the frame for the game to achieve 60 frames per second.
Right. And
you need a half that to 8.3 milliseconds to be able to do 120 frames per second. So that's not only is that like amazing that the game can process all those things, like it's like technical wizardry, quite frankly, to process everything that needs to go into a frame in 8.3 milliseconds, which is why you need the extra horsepower, the better hardware. But on top of that, the reason why I think it's significant And the reason why I think those games feel smoother is because literally your input and the game itself is being processed twice as fast as a 60 frames per second situation.
Well, and that's what I was saying, that with 120 FPS, you can definitely feel a difference if you play it enough.
Yeah.
But there's also, a threshold for where that stops being possible as well, like where the feeling is, there's not a significant difference, right? I'm pretty sure over 120 even, it's starting to not matter. In my experience with playing games at that frame rate and watching other people do that as well.
To be honest, I have not played anything over that. So
yeah, I play Valorant at over that, right? And that matters a lot, right? Valorant requires like very fast input, like acceptance, and it matters a ton, right? So in Valorant, the 144 refresh rate, the 120 FPS, like that matters a lot. People don't want to be below that because that's actually a disadvantage in a game like that. But in most games, that doesn't really matter. Like in single player games, you don't freaking need 144 FPS to like have it be a good experience.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up Valorant before the stream we were talking about. So for multiplayer games, your local refresh rate is one thing, but for multiplayer games, the server tick rate is important. So, for example, if your local machine can process the game at 120 frames per second, but the server tick rate is only at 60 frames per second, you're getting some things interpolated to make it look, feel smooth and stuff, but the actual like game logic and events that are getting processed is at 60. It's at 120. It's half of your speed. So, Valorant's actually we were talking about, we think is maybe the only one with 120 frames per second. Yeah, one of the only games with 120 frames per second
tick rate. Yeah,
120 tick rate. Sorry, on their multiplayer servers. Can you feel the difference? Like, have you played? Like CS:GO has 64.
I haven't played enough CS:GO to really feel it, but like, I think I think I can even feel a difference between Valorant and Rocket League.
I was just going to ask.
It feels very smooth. Like when you do something, like it just feels like what you did happened, right? The main thing is like the hit registration. That's an issue, and Valorant has had issues with hit registration where you're like, sure, you got a headshot, but it says you didn't. But that has nothing to do with the tick rate. But like as far as like being able to feel like your reactions are actually mattering, you can react to stuff, it definitely feels like that in Valorant more than almost any game I've ever played. So
yeah, the Rocket League servers I just looked, yes, are 60 tick. Yep.
Yeah, Rocket League 60. Fun fact, Super Monkey Ball was one of the first games ever to check things at a 60 at like a 60 times a second rate.
Really?
Yes.
On fucking GameCube?
Yeah.
I remember
the
playing it.
Mattered a ton.
I remember playing it on the GameCube and recalling like how smooth it was.
Yeah, that's why it feels so smooth, because it's actually checking your inputs every like 60 times a second.
So here's another question for you then, right? So now we've with the fact that frames take us a given amount of time of processing time to process. If you have 16.7 milliseconds to process a frame for your game, I personally again, let's use Halo Infinite as an example. It wasn't necessarily demonstrated in this demo, but if you told me that the graphics took a hit because AI behavior improved and that there were more AI in the scene.
Yeah, we got some like neural network chip going on the system to like make these like learning AI and shit, and they had to take the graphics for that.
Yeah, if you told me, we could have used 3 more milliseconds of frame on graphics, but instead we freed it up for like game logic shit, I'd be okay with that. I'm going to be honest.
Me too. I think there's things they could do to make the graphical style more consistent so it doesn't just look so jarringly bad. But regardless, right, like with that in mind, I think that something like that is cool. Like gameplay improvements at a cost of graphics is really valuable. And that's probably why a lot of these indie studios go for stylized graphics, because they're less demanding and they leave it more room for you to make gameplay innovation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the less polygons to draw, the better.
Talking about Serious Sam 4, a game that's coming out very soon, I think like less than a month. that game does not look great. Like, that game actually looks very similar to what Halo Infinite looked like in that trailer, but more consistent, at least across the board, so it doesn't look like jarringly bad. And the reason is because their engine can support like the most enemy density of like any game ever made. Like, they literally built the engine around enemy density. That was the main goal of the engine. So we'll see what that looks like, because Serious Sam 3 has levels where you're fighting like upwards of 30 plus enemies at the same time. Like, all like doing this shit, and probably more than that. I don't even know, but this could be like hundreds or thousands. I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see. I'm definitely going to play it, if only to just like experience what kind of technology they were able to put into this engine.
Wait, how many AI? You said thousands on screen?
Hundreds at least, I think.
Oh, hundreds. Yeah.
I don't know. I'll do some Google while you talk.
Yeah, when Halo Infinite was originally revealed in E3 2018, they did this tech engine demonstration where they were showing off the slip space engine. And one thing they showed was this like herd of rhinos with what appeared to have like individual pathfinding going on for all of them. So like it was like a herd running through, all kind of doing their own thing, and all animated independently and all with like their own like sort of particle effects going on, blah, blah, blah. And when I saw that, knowing that that's a tech engine demonstration, I was thinking like that's what they're trying to show off, is like how much AI we can put on the screen, you know, that we can put on like a nice amount of AI at the same time doing stuff, you know.
Yeah, you ready to have your mind blown?
I'm ready.
Serious Sam 4 developed, its Crow team, they developed the Legion system. And is a system they developed for Serious Sam 4. We have some levels that will actually be able to populate with 100,000 enemies. We were really pleasantly surprised with how fast it can run, because originally we were hoping for like 10,000 enemies, and now we've hit an order of magnitude more.
Well, that's cool. I also want to play it just to check that out. Now I will.
Enemies, dude.
Yeah, dude. How do you even what do you even do with that? Are they like all a bunch of like mosquitoes or some shit?
No idea.
You know, one thing that I actually kind of criticized Destiny 2 of when I was playing it was I felt that they went ham on enemy density, but the AI itself was not all that like intelligent. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, even if you have like 100,000 enemies, is that even fun if like the AI is dumb as hell? I don't know.
Right. So in that case, then you have things like, and this actually was shown in the Halo Infinite. You saw basically a brute use contextual dialogue and then action and a little bit of animation. Honestly, the animation wasn't super good. Maybe it was not done, but basically because there was a grunt next to him, he told the grunt to like go get him, and then he threw the grunt at Master Chief. You know what I mean? So that's cool. You know, things like that I'm down for.
Grant, was that scripted, or was that like an AI behavior?
The reason, like, at other points in the demo, the brutes talk differently, and there's no grunts nearby. Right. So
if there's always a grunt nearby, is the brute always going to do that?
Going to throw him?
That's not an AI behavior. That's just a scripted behavior, right?
Yep. And they did say that was after the fact. They said that wasn't like intentionally. They wanted to show that off, that sandbox-like interactions was something they had a lot more of in Halo Infinite.
That's cool. That's really exciting, because that's something that like actually enhances the gameplay in a unique way.
Yeah, it would be, you know, like I don't think they'll do this, but like it would, you know, it'd be cool if, you know, a brute in a certain situation where there's a jackal overhead picks up a scoped rifle and throws it up to him, you know.
Right.
That would like these are the kinds of things I wish I saw, you know what I mean? Like I would take that over the fact that there's 3 brutes on the floor and 2 ranged jackals up above. Like that there's just more things there. I would prefer that the 2 things that are there have a more rich interaction between each other, you know. Right. That's where I stand on that. Like I wish, and maybe they will, maybe like games that, so like you saw Ratchet and Clank, we've talked about that one before on the PlayStation 5, using I think that was a really tasteful and interesting way to use the SSD bump. Like, because just generally things are going to load faster, but instead of just being like things load faster, they like intentionally worked it into the game design and made it interesting.
It is perfect. Like that, they must have been so happy that team made that game. Like when they pitched the PS4's like hardware, that team must have been like, this is what we can do with it, let's go. And then they made like a trailer that basically like spoke for itself for the hardware for the PS5, and the Xbox definitely has not had anything like that so far.
Yeah,
it'll
I
be
agree.
really interesting to see, because that, like, honestly, that almost sold me on it, but I still probably won't get one because I don't buy non-Nintendo consoles. But
yeah. Well, maybe that's a way we can kind of wrap this up. Like we talked about, these things need to be there. Like it's a dance of like, on one hand, you want to make put improvements in the console that further the game experience, and at the same time, you want to put things in the console to help sell it in a way. It sounds like nobody is. Why do that? Okay, actually, you just made an interesting point. You don't want to buy these guys with like the latest, the best available, technology on console. Of course, you have PC, but Sony still is making exclusive games on their platform, like Ratchet and Clank, for example, that look like a lot of fun, that only can be played on there, blah, blah, blah. Meaning, like, even as a PC player, you still, like, if you want to play Ratchet and Clank, you need this thing. But why do you instead go with Nintendo, who still, like, from a technical punch perspective, isn't keeping up with the other two,
Yeah, I mean, I think because technical punch isn't why I play games. Right? I play games for unique experiences, and Nintendo has the most unique exclusive experiences. Like, even if PS4's exclusive experiences are very good, those kinds of experiences definitely still exist on PC. And a lot of the PS4 experiences are now coming to PC, like Death Stranding, for example, right? Like, so it's just like, I don't think that I need a console. And if there's a game I really want to experience, I'll watch it, or I'll find a friend who buys the PS5 and go play it with them. Like, I can find a way to play it. Like, I played The Last of Us with my friend, right? I managed to play that even though I've never owned a Sony console. So right. I think that, and yeah, it's just Nintendo's experiences are so much more unique. I've never, ever bought a console for a single game except for the Switch, which I bought for Mario Odyssey. Literally, right? I was going to buy it for Smash regardless, but then Mario Odyssey, when I saw the first Mario Odyssey trailer, I was like, I'm buying this console no matter what. And I don't think there's any game PlayStation could show that would convince me like that trailer did.
And yeah, and that one again is gameplay driven. Like,
right.
Mario Odyssey didn't have some insane visuals.
I mean, it definitely looked the best of any Mario game that's ever been made.
Yeah.
But yes, you are correct. The thing was the gameplay and the like experience.
And I think the one last thing maybe that I did want to talk about, unless you want something else, is there's the advent of these server cloud running games.
Stadia.
Yes. So Stadia pitched this at GDC, like when they did the initial like developer kind of targeted reveal of Stadia. They were like, it's cool. We have all these games, and like you can go from just watching it to immediately playing it, like wherever you are in your browser, all that stuff. But then they were like, but now imagine that your target platform was the servers, like the server farm, and that as a developer you weren't constrained to like hardware.
Yeah,
a console, but like the server.
I mean, we mentioned this last week, right? With Microsoft Flight Simulator, one of the first games that's going to truly take advantage of this technology comes out on Saturday.
Yep. And so far it looks awesome.
Looks amazing,
so
yeah.
But that just proves again, Stadia is great. They've got the servers, they've got the horsepower. But if you don't have the games, right. If you don't have the fun, like Nintendo has on a little teeny baby little Switch, board.
Right.
That's what makes it, it's those experiences.
I mean, I'm buying Microsoft Flight Sim, and hell no am I buying a Stadia, right? Like,
yep.
Like that's the shit right there.
Yep. 100%. And I mean, you see this even in the difference in the console generations right now. PlayStation is their business model is moving the console. So they're trying to make they're trying to make these really great last generation. Their first party studios did a great job on producing like really high quality shit that God of War, Last of Us, all this Spider-Man. these great experiences is what moves that hardware, though. It's
Yep.
If you don't have that, why do I buy that game? Why do I buy that PlayStation 5?
Hence
Oh,
why
the SSD
Halo is pushing
great.
Game Pass, right? Because honestly,
Hence,
I think their experiences are worse than Microsoft's experiences right now. So, of course, they're
last
pushing
generation,
Game
at
Pass.
least, if you look at the last generation from like a critical review perspective, the critical gaming space agrees with you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people would.
And
So,
I worry, like, just to say, like, is that quantity versus quality now? Are we actually seeing like a war between quantity from Game Pass and quality from PlayStation?
and is that unexpected, I guess? Do you kind of like, do you say if you're Microsoft and you have Game Pass, like we're going to take like this middle ground and we're going to produce a lot of like B tier experiences, you know?
I feel like at that point they should just stop making consoles then, honestly. Like we mentioned this before, but yeah.
Yeah, the Series X is basically just like, hey, here we have a custom PC
It even
for
looks
you at
like a
maybe
PC.
a relatively attractive price point for you, and you don't have to go through the hassle of figuring out how to make it here. There's a $500 custom PC from Microsoft. That's
Right.
really what
That's
the Series
literally
X
what it is. Yeah.
So anyway, cool. Yes, give us brutes who throw scoped rifles. Don't give us the 4K. We don't care.
Yes, exactly. So where can people find us?
You can find us at kokoalaentertainment.com. There you can get links to all our social media and links to our merch, where you can buy this shirt
You can't
and
buy
other
this shirt,
things.
Sorry.
Oh, guys, and on the merch front, you can buy, starting tomorrow, you'll also be able to buy like this slick sticker. Oh, it's probably not in focus because autofocus isn't on right now, but this is a summer design. This is what I'm telling you. If you are listening to this podcast, we have a merch summer design logo thing that is going away at the end of summer. So it's September 22nd, I think, is the last day of summer. You have until September 22nd to pull the trigger on that, and then it's gone forever.
Gone forever.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe some anniversary KO Koala way in the future, we might think about bringing it back. But if not, it's gone forever.
Yep.
So own this shit. Is hot. This is very nice. KOKoalaentertainment.com. That's what I was saying. You can find links to all our social media, Instagram, Twitter. We do giveaways. Most importantly, join the Discord. That's where the fam is at talking, and that is also where you can get your first sneak peek at the universe of our upcoming game, where you can begin to participate researching for Agora. Agora Corporation.
Agora.
Yeah.
What's that guy's name?
Ludwig Kane. Yeah, join in as your team, as your research projects reach research milestones. You get to get these little lore tidbits that are dropping for you, beginning to flesh out the universe. You will soon have a significant impact on.
Yes.
Soon, TM. Okay.
Thank you all for listening. Talk to you next week. Goodbye.
Hasta la vista.